We've come now to the conclusion of the Gospel according to John here in the 21st chapter. And though it is called the Gospel according to John, yet the primary focus of this last chapter, chapter 21, is centered around the Apostle Peter. Now, who was Peter? Peter certainly was one of the 12 learners, the 12 followers, the 12 disciples of Jesus. And Jesus was what was called one of the inner three disciples. That was Peter, James, and John. So that Peter had the most loving relationship, close, personal, intimate relationship perhaps in any other human being in the history of the world. That kind of proximity and closeness to Christ. And despite that, if you know anything about Peter, you know that he's one of the biggest boneheads of the Bible of all time. Peter's the one who would speak before thinking. He would act before thinking. Maybe you remember the story of the disciples out on the Sea of Galilee, and it's at night and it's storming, and Jesus comes out to them walking on the water, and Peter decides, hey, it'd be good for me to join you. And he climbs out of the boat, and he's trying to walk on the water too, trying to show how great and mighty his faith is, and he begins to despair. He's afraid. He starts to sink and to drown, and so Jesus reaches out and picks him up and puts him back into the boat. Peter, of course, was that follower of Christ who denied him. The evening of his trial, I do not know the man 3 times. And what makes that sting even more for Peter is that he was the one who claimed that he would never fall away. He would never leave him. We see this in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 14. Jesus says to all the disciples, he says, you will all fall away. But Peter said, even though they all fall away, I will not. I will never. They're going to fall away, sure, but not me. In other words, he's saying, Jesus, they might love you, but I love you more. I really love you way more than they do. They're going to fall away, not me. I love you the most. Despite this great failure, here in John 21, we see Jesus, again, this is his 3rd appearance after his resurrection. And Peter and some of the disciples are now 75 miles north of Jerusalem. They're on the Sea of Galilee. They've been fishing all night. We saw this last week if you were here. And they haven't caught a single thing, and it's early in the morning now. Jesus is standing on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and they don't know it's Jesus. And he calls out to them, and he says, cast your nets on the other side. And they do so, and all of a sudden, this supernatural, miraculous catch of fish. The text actually says 153 of them, so big they can't even get the fish into the boat. And when Peter realizes that it's Jesus, the text says he threw himself into the sea. And he's swimming as fast as he can, and he's wading through the water, and he gets there to the shore. Can you see him? And he's just drenched. He's just wet, soaking wet, and he's breathing heavy. And there's Jesus, and Jesus has a little charcoal fire and some bread and some fish. And Jesus, to Peter and all the disciples, he says simply, come and have breakfast. To sit with him, table fellowship was an act of intimacy, of covenant, of friendship and loyalty. I hope you can see the beauty of that scene. But then, things turn a little bit. It gets a little stranger as Jesus is there with Peter, and they've either stepped away, they're kind of alone with one another. And it seems like Jesus here, some people say that Jesus is being very unkind to Peter. Some people say that Jesus is being kind of cruel to Peter, because what he's doing, and he's taking Peter and he's reminding him in this moment of the worst thing, the greatest failure, and he's holding it up to him like a mirror. And he simply is not letting Peter forget what he had done. We say, why is Jesus doing this? First of all, there is this charcoal fire. We talked about this last week. It says here that he had this little charcoal fire, and that's where they gathered around for breakfast. But in John chapter 18, the scene, the setting of Peter's denial and rejection of Christ was in the courtyard of the high priest, and the text says specifically, now the servants and officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and warming themselves. And it says Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself by that charcoal fire. Can you smell it? The smell of the wood and the smoke. And here Peter is standing around another charcoal fire that Jesus has prepared, and he can smell the wood and the smoke. I'm sure it's taking him back. And then there's these questions that Jesus asks him over and over and over again, where he says to Peter, and Peter's name was also Simon, it says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And he said to him, feed my lambs. And then Jesus said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter says, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And he says, tend my sheep. And then Jesus says to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And it says here that Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And so Peter says, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus says to him, feed my sheep. So why is Jesus repeating this question once, twice, the third time? And it says on the third time, Peter was grieved. Or perhaps you're making the connection here between the questions, the three questions, do you love me? And what? The three denials that Peter had made. And again, it's Jesus holding up this terrible thing that Peter had done, this worst thing, and Peter's hurting. It says that Peter was grieved. And then also, the fire and these three questions, but the first time he asks him, do you love me? He actually says this. He says to Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Remember what Peter had said, they're all going to fall away. I will never fall away. I love you more than they do. And so here Jesus again is very directly and pointedly and surgically asking this question, Peter, do you love me more than these? Again, it seems like Jesus is just taking the dagger and sticking it in and twisting the knife into Peter's heart. And if we can use this metaphor, metaphorically, spiritually speaking, there is a blade. It's not a dagger, but it's a scalpel. Jesus, the great physician, is doing deep surgery on the heart of Peter. He is opening him up deeply, not to hurt him though, to heal Peter. I'm sure Peter wants to forgive and forget. He just doesn't want to even think about what he did, and he wants to run away, and he wants to, he's there in the presence of Jesus, but hey, let's not bring this up. You think Peter would have ever brought this up? But the whole point here that Jesus is making is he's bringing this out in the open, and he's saying to Peter and to all of us, you don't have to run away. You don't have to simply try and forget. Often we might try to numb ourselves or just to put it out of our mind, the terrible things that we've done. Jesus says, no. I know it all. Here it is. Guess what? I'm still here. I'm not going to leave you or forsake. Peter, do you think your rejection of me and do you think your denial, do you think betrayal would ever stop me from loving you? And you can imagine Peter thinking to himself or saying out loud, Lord, I'm so sorry for what I did. I will work and spend my whole life. What I did was unforgivable. And Jesus would say, Peter, what I did on the cross, that suffering and death, was to take what is unforgivable and make it forgivable. I'm not going anywhere, Peter. Yep, here it is. But I love you. And I will never leave you or forsake you. And then you notice that statement Jesus made every time. Do you love me? Yes, I love you. Feed my lambs. Do you love me? Yes, I love you. Tend my sheep. Do you love me? Yes, I love you. Feed my sheep. What is this about? He's calling Peter and he's saying to care for and to tend my sheep, my lambs. Who are the sheep and the lambs? Well, it's the church. It's the church. So every time that Jesus is going and he's asking this question and he's going in deep, do you also see there is deep love and affirmation of Peter that Jesus is putting in the place of guilt or shame? Because he's saying here essentially, yes, Peter, you're the greatest failure. I'm calling you to be the greatest leader. Along with the Apostle Paul, remember Paul, he was a persecutor, a murderer of Christians. Peter and Paul, the greatest leaders of the church. And Jesus is saying, yeah, I take the greatest failures and I make them the greatest leaders. I hold them up in honor. He's opening up Peter's heart. He's going in deep, replacing guilt or shame with his love and with his affirmation. Moving from John to the Gospel of Mark, if we can. I love the way Mark ends, Mark chapter 16. His account of the resurrection. So the women come to the tomb, the stone is rolled away, the angel is there, and the angel says, he is risen, he's alive. And then the angel says this, and you got to remember the word angel, it means angelos in the Greek, it simply means messenger. So what's an angel? It's a messenger for God, a messenger for Jesus. These are the words that Jesus wanted the women to make sure they told. It says this, the angel said, go tell his disciples and Peter that he's going before you to Galilee, and there you will see him just as he told you. What? You can imagine people saying, what did he say? Go tell his disciples and Peter that he's going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. What is he saying? What did he say? Go tell the disciples and Peter that he's going before you to Galilee, and there you will see him just as he told you. He said my name. Jesus, why did you say my name? This is Jesus saying, go tell the disciples and make sure you tell Peter, I want to see him. I'm not letting him go. And Jesus isn't going to let you go either. That Jesus loves you right now with all of his heart. You could never do anything to make Jesus love you more than he already loves you right now. Now, one final thing, maybe a little bit of application. Again, we've concluded John, but now I'm going back to Mark for a reason. Mark chapter 14 describes Peter's denial. And in Mark 14, it includes a detail of that denial that none of the other Gospels, the denial of Peter is in all four Gospels. This is the only Gospel that has this detail where it says this, that Peter began to invoke a curse, it says, on himself and to swear, I don't know this man of whom you speak. Can't even say the name Jesus. I don't know this man. And here, this is the ESV translation. It's the English Standard Version, a wonderful translation of the Bible. It says, he began to invoke a curse on himself. Now, that's a little bit of an over-translation. The translator's trying to be helpful. On himself is not in the original Greek text. All that the Greek says is that Peter began to invoke a curse and to swear, "I don't know the man." So the question is, who was Peter invoking a curse upon? And by curse, I mean the word is anathema in the Greek. It means to wish someone to be eternally damned. That's the curse. Is Peter cursing the people who are accusing him, saying, "Don't you know this man?" And he's cursing them? I don't think so, because that is not going to help him persuade them that he's not one of them and could get him arrested. Is Peter cursing himself? That is very possible, of course, and that's always how I have preached it. I preached it just last week. Peter's calling down a curse on himself, saying, "May I be damned if I know this man." But another possibility. This is an honor-shame culture. Loyalty is everything. And if he's really trying to prove to them that he has nothing to do with Jesus, was he calling down a curse on the people or on himself? Many commentators believe it is very possible that Peter was calling down a curse onto Jesus. You want to really prove that I am not with this guy? That very possibly he is saying, "May Jesus be damned. I don't know this man." And only Mark includes that detail. Now, who is Mark? Mark was the disciple of Peter. Mark was his right-hand man. Mark's gospel is Peter's gospel. Why is Peter, this great leader of the church, including this detail that very, very possibly not only did he deny Jesus, but he cursed him? That possibly he's saying, "I didn't just deny him, I damned him to hell." How can Peter do that? It's because he's no longer trying to work and to achieve his sense of self. His sense of self, his identity isn't something that he achieved. It's simply something that he received by grace. And Jesus had done surgery deep in his heart. He didn't have to run. He didn't have to hide. He didn't have to pretend. He didn't have to simply try and forget. He could be very open and vulnerable because the Son of God had become open and vulnerable and died for him on that terrible cross. And he knew that he was loved and forgiven for it all. Here's a little point of application. What a beautiful congregation this is. I don't say this often enough. I love you. I love you, people of our Father. And we are growing so close together. Could we grow even more vulnerable with one another? What does it look like for more and more for this to be the kind of community and a place where it's okay not to always be okay? That we're growing in the grace of God. I mean, we sing Amazing Grace. Look how amazing God's grace is. And here's the dynamic that takes place. The more you know your sinfulness, the more you really know what a poor, miserable sinner you are, as a Christian, you actually grow in your awareness of how loved you are and how amazing God's grace is and how soothing that balm is. How can we become more a place where it's okay to not always be okay? As we're growing in God's grace, his amazing grace seen in Jesus Christ. To him alone be all the glory. Amen.